When we think about World War II, there are countless battles and operations that shaped history. But few decisions were as ambitious and as disastrous as Operation Barbarossa. Launched in June 1941, it was Nazi Germany's massive invasion of the Soviet Union. Hitler believed it would bring him quick victory. Instead, it became his deadliest mistake. The plan was bold. Over 3 million German soldiers, thousands of tanks and aircraft stretched across an 1,800-mile front, ready to storm into Soviet territory. For Hitler, this wasn't just a military move. It was ideological. He saw the Soviet Union as both a racial enemy and a land full of resources Germany desperately needed. His generals warned him of the risks. Fighting Britain in the west while opening a huge front in the east was dangerous. But Hitler was convinced the Red Army would collapse quickly. At first glance, his confidence made sense. In 1939, Germany had crushed Poland in weeks. In 1940, France fell in just 6 weeks. Why wouldn't Russia fall just as easily? But here's the thing about the Soviet Union. It was huge, unpredictable, and unlike anything the Wehrmacht had faced before. Still, in June 1941, Hitler gave the order. The German army surged forward in what became the largest invasion in human history. The Soviets were caught completely off guard. Stalin had ignored warnings from spies and foreign leaders, believing Hitler wouldn't attack yet. When the invasion began, Soviet planes were destroyed on the ground. Entire divisions were surrounded, and cities fell within days. For the Germans, the first weeks looked like another lightning victory. By July, hundreds of thousands of Soviet troops had been captured. German propaganda boasted that the war in the East would be over by Christmas. Soldiers marched confidently, believing they were unstoppable. But the reality was already setting in. The distances were immense, the supply lines stretched thin, and the Red Army, though battered, refused to collapse. Hitler underestimated the resilience of Soviet soldiers and civilians. Instead of surrendering, they dug in, burned their own villages, and fought with desperation. And then came the weather. The German army was built for fast summer campaigns, not the mud of autumn and the brutal cold of winter. By October, the advance slowed. By November, temperatures plunged. German soldiers marched without proper winter clothing, their machines freezing in the snow. The Red Army counterattacked near Moscow in December, shocking the Germans who believed they were on the verge of victory. Operation Barbarossa had promised Hitler glory. Instead, it became a nightmare, draining Germany's strength and opening the door to eventual defeat. Looking back, it's hard not to see the hubris in Hitler's gamble. He ignored his generals, underestimated his enemy, and believed his own propaganda. And that is why historians today call Barbarossa not just a mistake, but the deadliest mistake of Hitler's entire war. When the invasion began on June 22, 1941, it was pure chaos for the Soviets. German planes bombed airfields, destroying thousands of Soviet aircraft before they even took off. On the ground, German tanks and mechanized infantry surged forward in lightning thrusts. Their goal: surround Soviet armies before they had a chance to retreat. And it worked. In the opening weeks, entire Soviet divisions were encircled and captured. The Germans claimed hundreds of thousands of prisoners. For the Wehrmacht, it seemed like history repeating itself. Just as France had collapsed in weeks, so too would the Soviet Union. But the Soviets were not France. Their land was vast, their population immense, and their capacity to endure suffering unlike anything Germany had faced before. German commanders pressed forward with 3 massive army groups: north toward Leningrad, center toward Moscow, and south toward Ukraine. Each advance was brutal, cutting deep into Soviet territory. Cities fell one after another: Minsk, Smolensk, Kiev. The world watched in shock as the Red Army seemed to crumble. Many wondered if Stalin's Soviet Union could survive at all. Inside Germany, spirits were high. Hitler told his people that the war in the East was already won. He bragged that the Soviet Union was nothing but a rotten structure. But even as German armies celebrated victories, cracks were forming. Supply lines stretched hundreds of miles, and fuel shortages became a real problem. The Soviet strategy of scorched earth made things worse. Retreating troops burned crops, destroyed railroads, and evacuated factories, leaving nothing useful behind. Still, the Germans pressed on. By late summer, they had captured or killed over 2 million Soviet soldiers. The numbers were staggering. Prisoner camps overflowed. Entire Soviet armies had vanished. For a moment, it looked like Hitler's gamble was paying off. Yet behind the scenes, the Soviets were regrouping. Stalin had moved factories east of the Ural Mountains, safe from German bombers, where they churned out tanks and weapons day and night. Meanwhile, Soviet civilians dug trenches, built defenses, and armed themselves however they could. The war was becoming one of survival. German soldiers began to notice something unsettling. No matter how many battles they won, the Red Army kept coming back. In one pocket, the Germans captured 300,000 Soviet troops. Weeks later, another 200,000 appeared from nowhere. It felt endless. And then came the mud. Autumn rains turned roads into rivers of sludge. Tanks sank, trucks stalled, and horses struggled to pull carts. The Wehrmacht had relied on speed, but speed was gone. Soldiers waded knee-deep through mud, exhausted, hungry, and frustrated. Still, Hitler pushed his armies toward Moscow. He believed capturing the Soviet capital would end the war. By October, German forces launched Operation Typhoon, the final push for Moscow. At first, it looked promising. More Soviet armies were encircled. But as November came, the weather turned. Temperatures dropped below freezing. Snow blanketed the landscape. German tanks and weapons froze. Oil turned to jelly. Soldiers wrapped themselves in whatever rags they could find, since Hitler hadn't prepared winter uniforms. Meanwhile, the Soviets brought in reinforcements from Siberia. Battle-hardened troops trained to fight in the freezing cold. These fresh divisions struck back just as the Germans were at their weakest. The counterattack near Moscow stunned the invaders. German soldiers who once marched confidently now retreated in panic, frostbitten and starving. The dream of conquering the Soviet Union in a few months had collapsed in the snow outside Moscow. For the first time in the war, the German army had been stopped. Barbarossa's momentum was broken. What was supposed to be a quick, decisive campaign had turned into a long, brutal war of attrition. And from this moment on, Hitler's greatest gamble became his greatest nightmare. By December 1941, German troops stood just miles from Moscow. They could see the faint glow of the city on the horizon. Victory seemed within reach, but they were exhausted, starving, and freezing. For the first time, German morale cracked. Soldiers wondered if Hitler had led them too far. Stalin, refusing to abandon Moscow, gave a fiery speech, "Not one step back." The capital would be defended at all costs. Then came the Siberian reinforcements. Fresh divisions, well-equipped for winter, launched a massive counteroffensive. German lines buckled under the assault. Entire divisions retreated, some collapsing altogether. The myth of the invincible Wehrmacht was shattered. For Hitler, this was unthinkable. He demanded his troops hold their ground, forbidding retreats even when they were encircled. This decision caused catastrophic losses. Thousands of soldiers froze to death, trapped in positions they could not defend. The Soviet counterattack pushed the Germans back hundreds of miles. Moscow was saved. It was the first major defeat for Hitler as army in World War II, and a psychological blow he would never recover from. Yet, instead of learning from the disaster, Hitler doubled down. He blamed his generals and took more direct control of military planning. He convinced himself the Soviets were on the brink of collapse, ignoring the evidence. The Red Army was rebuilding stronger than ever. Factories deep in Siberia churned out tanks like the T-34, simple but deadly. Soviet industry was working around the clock, far from German bombers. Meanwhile, civilians endured unimaginable hardship. Entire families starved, froze, or fled as the front lines moved across their towns. But instead of breaking, the Soviet spirit hardened. They were fighting not just for their country, but for survival itself. The Germans were shocked by the resilience. Every time they thought they had won, new Soviet forces appeared from the endless East. By 1942, Barbarossa's promise of quick victory was long gone. The war in the East had become a grinding struggle. Hitler changed strategy, focusing on southern Russia and the oil fields of the Caucasus. He believed cutting Soviet resources would bring victory. But this shift stretched his armies even thinner, creating vulnerabilities the Soviets would soon exploit. The dream of capturing Moscow had failed, but Hitler's obsession kept him fighting in a land that seemed to swallow armies whole. And the longer the war dragged on, the more Germany bled men, fuel, and time, things they could not afford to lose. For many historians, this was the turning point. Barbarossa was supposed to secure German dominance. Instead, it doomed them to a war they could not win. The Soviet Union had taken the punch, stumbled, and come back swinging. And this was only the beginning, because the war on the Eastern Front was about to enter its bloodiest phase, the battles of 1942 and 1943. Stalingrad, Kursk, and countless others were still to come, but their seeds were planted in Barbarossa's failure. Looking back, it's clear Hitler underestimated everything: Soviet resilience, the brutal winters, and the sheer size of the land he invaded. His arrogance turned what might have been a temporary success into a catastrophic long war. And once the Red Army gathered momentum, Germany would spend the rest of the war on the defensive. All because Hitler refused to admit that Operation Barbarossa had failed. For the soldiers who lived through it, the memory of that first winter remained forever etched in their minds. Cold, hunger, endless marches, and an enemy who refused to break. This was the reality of Hitler's deadliest mistake. By the end of 1941, it was clear Operation Barbarossa had failed. The Soviets were bloodied but unbroken, and the Germans were trapped in a war of attrition they couldn't win. Over 4 million German troops had marched east. Hundreds of thousands were already dead, captured, or too sick to fight. The myth of Blitzkrieg, of unstoppable German lightning war, was shattered in the snow outside Moscow. For the Soviets, it was a moment of hope. They had survived the impossible. From now on, they believed victory was possible. Hitler's mistake was not just military, it was strategic. By opening the Eastern Front, he created a war on two fronts, something German generals had always feared. Resources bled away. Fuel, weapons, and manpower were consumed faster than Germany could replace them. Meanwhile, Britain stood firm in the West, and by December 1941, the United States entered the war after Pearl Harbor. Suddenly, Germany was facing the combined strength of the Allies, all because Barbarossa had dragged them into a war they couldn't control. From 1942 onward, the Germans never regained the initiative in the East. The Red Army grew stronger each year, fueled by industry and determination. Stalingrad, Kursk, and the Long March to Berlin were all made possible because Barbarossa failed. For many historians, Barbarossa wasn't just Hitler's deadliest mistake. It was the moment Germany sealed its own defeat. Had Hitler stopped short of invading the Soviet Union, the war might have lasted longer, maybe even differently. But his obsession doomed him. The invasion also left a horrific human cost. Millions of Soviet soldiers and civilians perished in the first months alone. Entire villages were erased. The brutality of the campaign shocked the world. It wasn't just a military operation, it was a war of extermination. And yet, despite the suffering, the Soviets held on. Their resilience became one of the defining stories of World War II. Operation Barbarossa proved that arrogance, hatred, and overconfidence can destroy even the most powerful armies. It's a reminder that wars are not always decided by who strikes first, but by who can endure the longest. For Germany, Barbarossa marked the beginning of the end. For the Soviets, it marked the start of a brutal but unstoppable comeback. And for the world, it remains a lesson in how one man's gamble can change the course of history forever. So, when we look back at World War II, Operation Barbarossa isn't just a campaign. It's the story of Hitler's deadliest mistake and the moment the tide began to turn.